I had a lot of doubts because of how much, she even told her, oh my gosh, your dad, I mean, he was great, he's my idol and blah, blah, blah. And I just felt like, wow.
What if the man you thought was gone never actually left, but instead chose to live quietly in the last place on earth anyone would ever think to look? For nearly 5 decades, one question has haunted the collective consciousness like an unfinished melody. Not a question about official records or medical documents, but something far more elusive, a question about the nature of sound itself, about identity, about whether grief and hope can sometimes perceive the same acoustic phenomenon and interpret it in completely opposite ways. The story does not begin in glittering concert halls or behind velvet ropes. It does not start with government conspiracies or secret bunkers. Instead, it begins in a modest place of worship located in rural Arkansas. There, every single Sunday without fail, a man named Bob Joyce stands before his congregation and leads them in hymns. His voice carries the unmistakable weight of gospel tradition, the kind of sacred sound that reaches backward through generations, through decades of tent revivals and chapel rooms, through the spiritual music that shaped an entire nation's relationship with faith and redemption. No one in that congregation comes seeking entertainment or spectacle. They come seeking connection. And what many of them report experiencing is something they struggle to put into words: a presence, a recognition, a feeling of resonance that penetrates deeper than mere memory or nostalgia could possibly reach. Women report crying without understanding why. Men describe feeling simultaneously comforted and unsettled. Lifelong believers say they encounter something transcendent that challenges their previous understanding of what spiritual experience can feel like. Then, inevitably, the internet discovered what was happening in that church. On platforms designed for sharing and debate, someone uploaded something remarkable: audio recordings placed in direct comparison. Elvis Presley singing "Can't Help Falling in Love" in his iconic 1960 recording. Bob Joyce singing the same beloved hymn inside his small congregation. When listeners pressed play on both tracks simultaneously, what emerged was not mere similarity, it was precise overlap. It was acoustic overlap of a nature that suggested something beyond coincidence, beyond explanation through traditional means. Audio engineers began analyzing these recordings using spectrographic tools and frequency measurement technology. They isolated individual vocal tracks, measured harmonic patterns, compared waveforms in ways that transcended subjective opinion or personal bias. They looked for differences where we might expect to find them in tone quality, in vibrato characteristics, in the subtle inflections that make each human voice unique and identifiable. What these technical analyses uncovered challenged every traditional explanation that Bob Joyce was simply a talented impersonator, that he had devoted years to perfecting the distinctive mannerisms and vocal qualities of the king, that he was another in a long line of skilled performers who built careers on mimicry. But impersonators spend their lives perfecting what they are trying to replicate. They market themselves. They build their entire identity around the resemblance. For the past 4 decades, Bob Joyce has lived a life of absolute simplicity within his community. He preaches without theatrical embellishment or performance artifice. He sings without seeking applause or external validation. He has never capitalized on the resemblance in any visible or documented way. He has never sold merchandise bearing his name or the theory. He has never granted exclusive interviews to media outlets hungry for sensationalism. He has never released albums marketed specifically toward those convinced of his secret identity. He has never appeared on television to promote himself or leverage the speculation that has made him famous throughout certain communities online. Every Sunday morning, Bob Joyce conducts his faith and offers his voice to those who gather. He leads prayer. He delivers sermons about redemption and spiritual transformation. He sings in a manner that suggests decades of practice in this specific tradition, not in rock and roll, but in gospel, not in arenas, but in sanctuaries. His life reflects consistency, dedication to his calling, and a complete absence of the personal ambition that would be natural if his identity were something other than what he claims. Yet the people who make pilgrimages to see him, some traveling from across the nation, some from multiple countries, will tell you something that challenges rational dismissal. These are not casual observers collecting curiosities. These are serious students of Elvis's vocal history. They have spent years, sometimes decades, listening to every recording ever released. They have studied bootleg recordings and live performances from different eras. They have educated themselves on how his voice changed across time, how his technical abilities evolved, how his instrument itself aged and transformed. They describe the voice as carrying an essence so identical to Elvis Presley that the distinction between the two becomes almost impossible to maintain. They speak of a voice that does not impersonate but rather embodies, that does not approximate but rather is. They offer their conviction without hesitation or equivocation. But here is where the narrative shifts from simple mystery into something far more psychologically and emotionally complex. Here is where the story moves beyond acoustic analysis into the realm of grief, loss, and the human need to believe that extraordinary people sometimes get choices. Too, for decades, she had largely declined to engage with this question. She had maintained a protective silence, not out of evasion, but out of dignity, out of an understanding that some questions feed themselves the more you answer them. That engagement itself can become a kind of validation. But when the question was posed to her, when she was asked point-blank what she truly thinks about the theory that has consumed millions of people, her response was nothing like what anyone had anticipated or prepared for. She did not dismiss it with a wave of her hand. She did not laugh it off in the manner of someone addressing something beneath serious consideration. She did not offer the reflexive denial that would have been most protective of the official narrative, most convenient for the Grassland brand, most useful for managing the carefully constructed legacy that she has stewarded throughout her adult life. Instead, she spoke with something that seemed to contain genuine understanding. She acknowledged that Elvis carried within him a deep, almost desperate hunger for privacy and anonymity. She spoke about how suffocated he felt by the machinery of fame, how the endless demands, the constant surveillance, the requirement that he always be on, had slowly consumed him from the inside. She described a man trapped inside his own image, someone who felt more imprisoned by his success than he could possibly have been by failure. She talked about an artist who wanted nothing so much as to walk into a room without every single person in it needing something from him, wanting something from him, demanding he perform his identity for their benefit, in language so meticulously chosen that it seemed almost intentional in its ambiguity. She said she would understand, truly understand, if Elvis had found a way to step outside this existence entirely. If he had discovered some path toward disappearing from the public eye. If he had managed to reclaim his life from the industry that had consumed it. She did not say that he had done this. But she deliberately did not say that he had not done this. For the believers who have defended this theory across the decades, who have endured mockery and dismissal, who have been called conspiracy theorists and delusional, who have been told repeatedly that they were incapable of accepting simple truth, Priscilla's statement felt like more than validation. It felt like acknowledgement from the one person in the world who would know. It felt like permission. The theory itself rests on an unsettling foundation. When you listen to recordings of Bob Joyce singing gospel music, you are hearing something that ordinary explanation struggles to accommodate. The voice is not similar to Elvis Presley. The voice contains the precise acoustic characteristics of Elvis Presley. The vibrato pattern matches. The harmonic frequencies align. The vocal signature, that invisible fingerprint that makes each human voice unique across a lifetime, appears to be identical. Audio engineers and vocal coaches have attempted to explain this through the lens of impersonation and dedicated mimicry. They have suggested that Bob Joyce must have spent 40 years perfecting his replication. that he has somehow encoded the Elvis vocal signature so deeply into his own instrument that even sophisticated technology cannot tell them apart. But this explanation collapses almost immediately under scrutiny. He has never taken stage roles or performed in tribute shows. He has never sought audiences beyond his congregation. He has never built his life around the resemblance. In fact, he seems almost unaware of or uninterested in the storm of speculation that his existence has generated. He simply preaches, he simply sings, and he simply serves his community in the manner he has always served it. For someone claiming to be something other than what he says he is, Bob Joyce has done everything possible to avoid proving that claim. The theory itself has evolved into something more sophisticated than simple celebrity conspiracy. People do not believe that Elvis faked his death to live in luxury or excess or hidden palaces surrounded by wealth and secrecy and the mechanisms of continued fame. That would be absurd and would contradict everything we know about who Elvis was at the end of his life. No, the theory suggests something far more profound and, in a strange way, far more comforting. It suggests that Elvis Presley found a way to disappear not into hedonism, but into humility. That he discovered a path toward reclaiming the spiritual tradition that had always grounded him, the gospel music that had shaped his youth and his understanding of faith. That he stepped away from the circus of celebrity and into something quiet, something true, something that allowed him to return to the one thing that ever made him feel whole, singing in worship rather than singing for applause. Whether Bob Joyce is or is not Elvis Presley has become almost secondary to the question of what his existence represents. He represents the possibility of escape. He represents the fantasy that the machinery of celebrity, once engaged, can theoretically be disengaged. He represents the hope that a man drowning under the weight of his own legend might find a way to become anonymous again, to reclaim his life, to sing for God instead of singing for the world. The timeline supports this narrative interpretation. Bob Joyce's documented presence in Arkansas begins almost precisely when Elvis Presley's life ended in 1977. The geography makes sense. Arkansas is close enough to Memphis to feel familiar, yet far enough away to create genuine anonymity. The psychology fits perfectly. A man suffocated by fame returning to the one tradition that ever made him feel truly free, that provided spiritual grounding and authentic connection rather than commercial performance. She would not blame him. She would not judge him. She would comprehend the reasoning that led to such a decision. And for millions of people who have believed this for years, that acknowledgement feels like something approaching vindication. Not proof, certainly not definitive confirmation, but something perhaps more meaningful: permission. The permission to continue believing that maybe, just maybe, the king never actually left the building. Perhaps the deepest truth in this story is not about whether Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. Perhaps it is about what the persistence of this question reveals about grief, about loss, about the human capacity to construct hope out of acoustic analysis and spiritual longing. Perhaps it reveals something true about Elvis himself, that even at the height of his power and fame, he was desperately searching for a way out of the trap he occupied. Priscilla understood this about him. She lived with this about him. She watched him deteriorate under the pressure of being the thing the world had turned him into. And when she was finally asked about Bob Joyce, she was not answering as a defender of official history. She was answering as someone who had loved the man and knew what he truly wanted. She was answering with compassion for a question that refuses to die because it reflects something real about Elvis, about fame, about the price of immortality. The real shock of her response was not that it confirmed anything, it was that it recognized the emotional truth underneath the question. It was her saying, in effect, "I understand why this matters. I understand what you're really asking, and I understand what he would have wanted." In recent years, the theory has neither solidified into certainty nor faded into complete dismissal. It exists in suspension, a kind of beautiful uncertainty where people continue to make pilgrimages to that church in Arkansas, continue to listen to recordings of Bob Joyce singing, continue to hear in his voice something that speaks to them at levels deeper than explanation can reach. The question of whether Elvis faked his death matters less than what the persistence of that question tells us about him, about his suffering, about his humanity, about the price paid by those who become larger than life. Priscilla Presley became a steward of his memory, a keeper of his legacy, someone tasked with maintaining the carefully constructed mythology while also protecting the man underneath it. She did this with grace and dignity for decades, asking for nothing except to be allowed to grieve privately, to remember him as a man rather than a monument. So when you see Crime Brief investigating Elvis conspiracies and the lesser-known truths about his life, you are seeing investigations into something far more important than gossip or tabloid sensationalism. You are seeing investigations into what it costs a human being to transcend the ordinary, and whether that cost is ever truly worth the price paid. Hit the like button. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next revelation about Elvis, Priscilla, and the figures who have shaped this enduring mystery. Share this with someone who still believes in the king, someone who understands that the greatest questions are not always solved by evidence, but by the love of those who refuse to let legends disappear completely.